Welcome back to the channel. I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist, and in today's video, one senior writer at Sports Illustrated thinks that the Jets are the most fraudulent team in the NFL coming into the 2024 season. We're going to assess their offense, defense, as well as any additions in which they've made or subtractions, as well as assess their schedule and see if we come to agree or disagree with his assertion. Please remember to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. In an article written by Ralph Ventry of SI.com, NFL Insider gives ridiculous fraudulent label to New York Jets. The article begins, "Not everyone is bullish on the New York Jets stock in 2024. The consensus opinion appears to be one that views the Jets as a legitimate Super Bowl contender, more than capable of ending the franchise's 13-year postseason drought. But Sports Illustrated betting senior editor Ian McMillan isn't buying it. The sportsbooks have set New York's official regular season win total at 9.5 games, and the over bet comes in at minus 150 odds according to DraftKings. While calling the Jets the most fraudulent team in the NFL, SI's McMillan has tabbed under 9.5 as his favorite wager on the win totals odds board. Specifically, the betting analyst is skeptical of the 40-year-old quarterback Aaron Rodgers coming off Achilles surgery. While the Jets are heavily betting on a healthy Rodgers to elevate the franchise, the SI expert is fading the four-time NFL MVP. He points to Rodgers' last season in Green Bay as evidence that the quarterback's decline actually began prior to the injury. So, yes, there were some signs of decline during his last season with the Green Bay Packers. I will say, though, they were very talent deficient. Christian Watson was their best receiver, for instance. Robert Tonyan or even Aaron Jones was their second best receiver. And Christian Watson wasn't healthy the whole year either. So I will say, while it is fair to believe that some of his unders in terms of his career totals in yards, air yards per attempt, and so on and so forth, are related to decline, his situation really wasn't very good, and I don't think that's completely fair. The article continues, in 2022, Rodgers averaged 6.8 pass yards per attempt, the second lowest of his career. He completed 64.6% of passes for 3,695 yards and 26 touchdowns, while being picked off 12 times. The Packers finished 8-9 overall, coming up short in a win-and-in regular season finale against the Detroit Lions. So once again, what I think he's looking at is just pure stats and not putting any context behind it. His weapons were, when healthy, a rookie Christian Watson, Robert Tonyan, and Aaron Jones, who is very good, or at least was back then. He's still pretty good, but he didn't have Devontae Adams anymore. Where were his weapons? So that's completely ignoring context. And here is the quote. If you're looking for a win total bet for the upcoming season, there's none I like better than under 9.5 wins for the Jets at plus 125. You can talk about their defense, their improved offensive line, and the weapons they have on offense all you want, but unless you have a strong, healthy quarterback, you're going to struggle as a team, especially so if your head coach has a career record of just 18-33. Rodgers will either be sidelined with an injury once again or fail to live up to the expectations that people have set out for him at 40 years old. And that's a quote. So, sure, they might not live up to expectations. Aaron Rodgers could absolutely get hurt. He may not be the same quarterback anymore. None of us truly know that. But once again, he is absolutely ignoring all context. Also, as to their head coach's record, who has he had at quarterback? Is it his fault that they drafted him? You could maybe argue that. But his best quarterback in his tenure with the Jets has been Zach Wilson. The rest of his quarterbacks were worse than Zach Wilson. Sorry, the 4 snaps in which Aaron Rodgers played, that Aaron Rodgers was technically the best quarterback he's ever had. So once again, he's completely ignoring all context. Now, whether or not you believe Rodgers comes back, stays healthy, so on and so forth, is completely up to you, and none of us really know. It's completely speculative, but I don't know if this guy's like a Bills fan or somebody that just particularly wouldn't like the Jets, or if Aaron Rodgers has done something to make him not like him or something. But I think he has some personal vendetta here because he has quite a strong opinion on this matter. So Aaron Rodgers is 6'2", north of 220 pounds. He's 40.6 years old, so definitely on the older side of being a quarterback, but he is an NFL legend. So I wanted to share with you some advanced metrics from 2022, his past healthy season. There's nothing to show you from 2024. He went 0 for 1 on passes and played 4 snaps, so there's no value gained there. But looking at his 2022 advanced metrics, he had 3,695 passing yards, which was good for 11th in the NFL, with 4,346 air yards, which was good for 9th in the NFL, along with 22 money throws, which was good for 12th in the NFL. So once again, his overall yards weren't at his standard. But once again, the context, what weapons did he really have? His 7.4 red zone accuracy rating was good for 6th in the NFL, and his deep ball accuracy rating was good for 13th in the NFL with a 6.0 grade. So his accuracy with the deep ball and in the red zone was still rather elite. So it wasn't as though his touch really was lost or anything. It looks, as far as these stats are concerned, it was just his total counting stats. His 6.8 yards per attempt were 23rd in the NFL, which suggests that he was not throwing the ball deep, but once again, who did he have? One thing about Aaron Rodgers is you have to build trust with him for him to throw to you. With Davante Adams out of town in 2022, his best options were a rookie, Robert Tonyan, Aaron Jones. It's no wonder that his yards per attempt declined. Who was he going to throw to? His 6.4 adjusted air yards per attempt was good for 18th in the NFL, and his 8.0 air yards per attempt were good for 14th in the NFL. So a little bit better than his total yards per attempt. But once again, context is everything here. Does it look like there could be some decline? Sure, but I don't think that's a fair shake for him to just look at a couple overall counting stats and not look at some of the advanced metrics. Now that we've taken a look at Aaron Rodgers' past healthy season, let's look at their star running back Breece Hall from 2023. Standing at 5'11", 217, he has a 30.3 BMI. That puts him in the requisite size for a bell cow role, and he's been a bell cow his entire tenure with the Jets. He's also only 23.1 years old, so he has a long career ahead of him. Let's look at a couple of advanced metrics from this past season for Breece Hall. His juke rate of 25.8% was good for 5th in the entire NFL. His 77 evaded tackles were number 1 in the entire NFL. And his 11 breakaway runs were good for 11th in the NFL. So he's a shifty, agile back who has tremendous vision and nasty juke moves, as evidenced by his juke rate. Now let's look at a couple of stats that really show you just how talented he is at creating yards. He finished 3rd in the NFL with 1,166 total created yards. That is really, really good. His 3.9 yards created per touch were also 10th in the entire NFL. So this guy is really good at doing things by himself to get yards. So that really just shows how good he is at getting yards by himself with no help from other people. He's also a threat as a receiver. His 56.7% route participation was good for 8th in the NFL. So that shows that he was used as a weapon in the offense through the passing game. His 7.8 yards per reception were also 12th in the NFL among running backs. He was used out of the backfield. He was used on flat routes, screens, wheels. He was even used out wide and in the slot at times. This guy is a true difference maker in the passing game and, dare I say, an actual passing game weapon. He also finished with 1.74 yards per route run, which is good for 3rd in the NFL among running backs. All this goes to show is that He is one of the best playmakers at the running back position in the entire NFL. So far we have Aaron Rodgers, who did show potentially some decline, but it's important to remember context, and their running back is one of the best running backs in the entire NFL. Finally, let's look at star wide receiver Garrett Wilson. He's 6 foot 184 and just turned 24 years old. Before we get into his counting stats and a couple of other metrics, let's look at how pitiful his targets were. He had the 48th best target quality rating. That's worse than all 32 starters in the NFL and a bunch of second receivers. He also had the 65th best catchable target rate. That just goes to show you how ungodly terrible his quarterback play was. This guy is one of the top 5 most talented wide receivers in the entire NFL, but what is he going to do if his guys can't get him the ball? He had 95 receptions this past year, which was good for 13th in the NFL. He really was the only playmaker on this team. Xavier Gibson was probably their second best wide receiver, so it was all up to him as to whether they were going to do anything through the air. His 1,042 receiving yards were good for 22nd in the NFL, which is actually a little bit fewer than his rookie year, but then again, his quarterback play was also worse than it was in his rookie year, which was still terrible. His 328 yards after catch were good for 28th in the NFL, but then again, he had to do everything he could to actually catch the passes to begin with. It's not like they put him in stride to have easy yards after catch. He had to fight for anything he got this past season. He also finished 4th in the entire NFL with 992 unrealized air yards. And that truly just goes to show how pitiful the quarterback play was. This guy almost had 1,000 yards that he wasn't able to realize because of how bad the quarterback play was. His win rate versus man was good for 17th in the entire NFL. And keep in mind, this is while facing constant double teams. He is one of the best man-beating wide receivers. It's just really hard when you're being double-teamed, you're the only threat through the air, and your quarterback play is either Zach Wilson or worse. He also was the 10th most targeted wide receiver versus man, which also goes to point out that they didn't really have any other options. All in all, he is an elite wide receiver, and assuming Aaron Rodgers stays healthy this season, he is really going to show out for y'all in 2024. So, we've looked at their quarterback and some of their best offensive playmakers on the offense. Let's take a look at their offensive line. Keep in mind that this past season, they dealt with a ton of injuries on the O-line. Mekhi Becton, who really wasn't that great to begin with, he was just a physical specimen, was hurt basically the entire season. Their star guard, at least star as a rookie, Elijah Vera Tucker, was also hurt. They were really hurting, and it wasn't as though they had the best line to begin with, but the injuries compounded how terrible the offensive line play was for the whole offense. Looking at their starting lineup, it's going to be Tyron Smith, John Simpson, Joe Tippmann, Elijah Vera Tucker, and Morgan Moses. So, assuming he can stay healthy, Tyron Smith is one of the better offensive tackles in pass protection and run blocking. Elijah Vera Tucker is especially good in pass protection, but he's no slouch in the run game either. And Morgan Moses, this past season for the Ravens, was one of the best run-blocking offensive tackles in the entire league. They also drafted Olu Fashanu, so should they deal with any injuries to either one of these tackles, they have a top 10 talent at offensive tackle waiting. Even though he was technically drafted at 11 because they traded down, he is going to be so good. The woes in which they suffered this past season are not due to replicate this year. All in all, Aaron Rodgers projects to have much better pass protection this season, and while obviously, yes, he could get hurt, no one on earth can project injuries. Anyone that says they can really is lying. But I mean, assuming that he's able to stay healthy, he should be protected. Now that we've assessed their quarterback situation, their offensive playmakers, and their offensive line, let's take a look at some of their star defenders, as well as how their defense fared this past year. And once again, it's important to remember context. these guys were always on the field because the offense was always turning the ball over on their own half of the field. They couldn't sustain drives. And when you were on the defense and you're on the field the entire game, you get gassed. So some of these stats are absolutely affected by the time in which they had to spend on the field. Although Sauce Gardner only had the 76th best coverage rating overall, he had the second best man coverage success rate, which means when in man coverage, he was smothering the other team's wide receivers. His 88.1 passer rating allowed was good for 29th in the NFL. So not quite the season he had in his rookie year. He was an all-pro, all-pros that season. But once again, context matters. His 1.3 yards of target separation were good for 9th in the entire NFL, which means his coverage was absolutely sticky. And you can't talk about stud defenders, especially from the New York Jets, without mentioning Quinnen Williams. He is one of the best nose tackles in the game. Among defensive tackles, his 39 total tackles was good for 4th. His 5.5 sacks were also 20th in the NFL among defensive tackles. His 33 QB pressures were also good for 19th in the NFL among defensive tackles. And his 11 tackles for loss were good for 8th. And finally, his 16 run stops were good for 3rd among defensive tackles this past season. So this guy, despite being on the field so much and being gassed through no fault of his own, was still able to put up these ridiculous stats. He is one of the premier defensive tackles in the game. And he, along with Sauce Gardner, are cornerstones of the defense, which, assuming Rodgers stays healthy, is going to be absolutely lethal this season. Taking a look at how their defense fared this past season, and keep in mind, their numbers would have been much higher if they weren't on the field so much. Take a look at this. Their 20.9 points allowed were good for 10th in the NFL, which would have been much lower if they weren't on the field so much. Then their opponent's yards per game was only 292.3, which was 2nd in the NFL. It would have been even lower than that. Their opponent points per play was .327, which was also 9th in the NFL. Their opponent yards per play was 4.6, which was 1st in the entire NFL. Their third down percentage allowed was 37.19, which was 12th in the NFL. Their fourth down conversions allowed percentage was 43.75, which was 5th in the NFL. Their opponent red zone scoring touchdown percentage was 48.98, which was 7th in the NFL. And their opponent touchdowns per game of 2.1 was 9th in the NFL. So out of all these stats, 12th was the worst in which they finished, and all but 2 of these stats, they were sub 10. That's how dominant their defense is, and it's not any different this season. Their offense is just likely to be better, which in turn will help their defense be even more dominant this season. Taking a look at their projected depth chart on both offense and defense, it's pretty solid. I definitely think that they should be viewed, if they stay healthy, as potential favorites for the Super Bowl. You have Rodgers at quarterback. Now, we'll see if he returns to form or not, but if anything, how much worse could it be than Zach Wilson, or worse than Zach Wilson? I would take a completely hurt Aaron Rodgers over Zach Wilson any day. Then you have Breece Hall at running back, one of the best. They just drafted Braylon Allen, who reportedly in camp has looked pretty good. Then you have Garrett Wilson. You have Mike Williams as long as he stays healthy. We'll see. We, once again, can't project injuries, but I wouldn't expect too much, honestly, out of him, but who knows. Then you have Xavier Gibson. He reports in camp that he's looked pretty good. They did draft Malachi Corley in the 3rd round, and Aaron Rodgers asked them to draft him. He should be in the slot this season and is a yards after catch magnet. Then we spoke about their offensive line. They signed Tyron Smith. They traded for Morgan Moses. Tyron Smith is a solid pass blocker and run blocker. Morgan Moses is a lethal run blocker. They drafted tackle Olu Fashanu, so if either one of them experiences injury, they have a stud left tackle or right tackle. Then when we look at their defensive line, it is crazy. They have Jermaine Johnson III, they have Javon Kinlaw, Quinnen Williams. They even have Solomon Thomas to come in during downs in which they're not able to play. Then they have Hassan Reddick, who has been one of the better edge rushers the past couple of seasons that they signed. Their linebacking core is actually pretty solid. C.J. Mosley and Quincy Williams are both very good, especially Quincy Williams. Then Sauce Gardner is one of the best cornerbacks in the entire NFL. Chuck Clark is underrated as a safety. Tony Adams is decent as well. Then DJ Reed at right cornerback is very solid. He and Sauce Gardner are a perfect complement for each other. And Michael Carter II in the slot is one of the better slot cornerbacks. So overall, their offense and defense looks really, really good on paper. And their defense is going to be absolutely crazy. Taking a look at the Jets' 2024 schedule, their over-under is set at 9.5 wins, and that Sports Illustrated editor is heavily taking the under and thinks that you should too. I think they're going to lose Week 1 versus San Francisco, but I think they're going to have wins over Tennessee, New England, and Denver before potentially losing to Minnesota and Buffalo, then beating Pittsburgh and New England again, losing to Houston, then beating Arizona and Indianapolis, losing to Seattle, winning against Miami, winning against Jacksonville, losing against the Rams, beating Buffalo the second time, and losing their second game to Miami. So I think they're going to finish 10-7. So I would take the over, but I wouldn't be a firm over on that either. They could easily win 8 games. They could also win 11 games, potentially even 12 if things go their way. I obviously don't think that they're going to go undefeated, and I'm not a Jets fan, so there's absolutely no bias on my part here. I'm a Ravens fan. So I personally would take the over, but I could absolutely understand if you wanted to take the under this season, especially with the potential health concerns of Rodgers. Is he the same guy? Their coaching isn't necessarily the best. I just believe in the overall talent of this roster, especially the playmaking positions on offense, their improved offensive line, and what is one of, if not the best defenses in the entire NFL. So after reviewing their roster, their playmakers on offense, their offensive line, Aaron Rodgers, their entire defense, along with their schedule and total depth charts on both sides of the ball, I don't think that they're frauds. I think that I would personally take the over on 9.5 wins, but it's not a firm over. I think I could see them winning 8 games. I could also see them winning potentially 12 games if things go right for them. What do you think, though? Do you think that the Jets are frauds? Do you think that they're legitimate contenders? Please let me know in the comment section and let me know why. With that being said, I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist, your NFL breaking news source, and the Dynasty and Redraft implications behind said breaking news. Please remember that I am building a library of information with which you can use to dominate your fantasy leagues in both 2024 and beyond. Please remember to like and subscribe. It would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you and have a good day.